Hello, it's Dr. Trev Tucker again with the third and final part of my presentation called From Stenoses to Fatigue and Scleroses. In parts 1 and 2 of this presentation, I provided the following basic observations. The first was that an obstruction in a drainage vein from the brain may cause a region of local hypertension at the drainage end of the capillary bed, in other words, at the venule end of the bed. This local hypertension would reduce blood flow through the capillaries in accordance with Darcy's law. It would also reduce the transfer of oxygen and other nutrients into the brain in accordance with Fick's law. This results in patient fatigue, brain fog, and the other symptoms of multiple sclerosis. It also results in the deterioration of myelin because the myelin support cells, the oligodendrite cells, are dying from the lack of oxygen. I now need to talk about the blood-brain barrier. This is a unique barrier. It's a layer of cells around the capillaries and venules, and it acts as a barrier, and it protects the brain from such large cells and molecules as iron, the autoimmune attack cells, and bacterial cells, while at the same time it allows small molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide and nutrients like glucose to pass from the blood into the brain. If there is a disruption to that blood-brain barrier, then the autoimmune attack cells like T cells and B cells, and also iron, can make their way into the brain. So the impact then of a failure of the blood-brain barrier. A number of studies have indicated that a disruption of that barrier is associated with, or it precedes, the attack by autoimmune cells on myelin in multiple sclerosis. It's also been observed in the literature that acute hypertension can cause a disruption of the blood-brain barrier. There is a book called Introduction to Blood-Brain Barrier, edited by Partridge, in which there is an entire chapter written by Johansson on hypertension, and it discusses the impact of body-wide hypertension as opposed to the very special local hypertension that I'm talking about. The body-wide would be on the heart's arterial side, and it would be associated with the measurement with a cuff on the arm. This is not the type of hypertension that could be measured with a cuff on the arm. It's not on the arterial side, it's on the venous drain side. And if a local hypertension caused disruption occurs in the barrier, it would in fact be at the drainage or the venule end of the capillary bed. That also has been scientifically observed. The physics of fluid dynamics here predicts that the standing wave's repetitive overpressure is going to increase towards the venules. And it may be that such local hypertension is sufficiently high or acute to cause a disruption in the barrier. And with a failure of that barrier, the attack cells, the autoimmune attack cells, may enter the brain and attack the weakened myelin. So the impact then through venous angioplasty, removing an obstruction, and I focus now on the internal jugular vein, what it will do is it will increase the blood flow through the capillaries, which in turn will increase the transfer of oxygen, glucose, and other nutrients into the brain. This will reduce chronic fatigue and brain fog, and that phenomenon has been reported thousands of times now by many patients. And I would also refer you to David Hubbard's presentation in Bologna in February of this year, in which he used a technology called functional MRI and measured oxygenation in the brain of MS patients, both before and after angioplasty. And he found that before angioplasty, the oxygenation activity was low, and after angioplasty it resumed values that were much more normal. The removal of the obstruction, however, likely doesn't substantially impact existing scleroses and iron deposits. They're still going to be there. However, it may clear a secondary stenosis that may exist above the primary obstruction. Let's have a summation look now at some of the MS properties that are observed and compare those to the predictions that come about as a result of the physics of fluid dynamics. The first property is in MS patients, the observed chronic fatigue and brain fog. Well, the prediction from fluid dynamics is there will be a back pressure, local hypertension created, and it'll be at the venule end of the bed, and it's going to reduce blood flow through the capillary bed and also the flow of nutrients. This is all in accordance with Darcy's law and Fick's principle. Venous angioplasty reduces that chronic fatigue, reported many times. Taking out the obstruction means that the back pressure is going to reduce, and that's going to increase the flow of blood and oxygen and nutrients into the brain. The observation in science of MS that a disruption in the blood-brain barrier precedes MS. Well, if the elasticity limit of the barrier is exceeded with the acute local hypertension, that would then be consistent with this disruption that's observed. It's observed that there is an autoimmune attack in multiple sclerosis. This is the primary thing that's observed. If the blood-brain barrier is no longer intact, that means that the autoimmune cells can get through the barrier and into the brain, and in the brain it may cause the deprived, deteriorating myelin to be susceptible to the attack from those autoimmune cells. Clearing that obstruction often clears the secondary stenosis, which is above the primary stenosis. And this is consistent with the prediction that the standing wave is cleared and the node is cleared, therefore the lower pressure area, which causes a collapse in the vein, goes away and the vein returns to its normal size. All of these correlations or matchups between the observables in MS and the predictions from fluid dynamics seem just a little bit too well matched to be coincidental. Now, I'm not saying that these are all the phenomena. There are going to be other pieces of the puzzle that need to be examined. For example, the influence of the dimensions of the vein, the distance between the obstruction and the sensitive area of the venules. One can imagine a situation in which there is a node, because of what the wavelength is and where the obstruction is. There is a node at that sensitive area in the venules. That's low pressure, which may not give rise to a disruption of the blood-brain barrier. So you would have a patient who has an obstruction but does not have MS. Why are there twice as many female MS patients as male? Why is there the geographic density distribution that we see in the northern regions like Greenland, Sweden, Canada? The per capita population of MS is much greater than other parts of the world. There's science that indicates a previous viral infection may influence MS. It's been shown that a diet can reduce the symptoms of MS. Taking vitamin D can reduce the symptoms of MS. Some of these things may be interrelated. For example, the sunshine content has vitamin D in it, and you get less sunshine in the northern countries. And it may well be that diet and vitamin D go hand in hand. It's also known that as a patient ages, the symptoms of MS become worse. So how does that link into it? It's also known in the radiation safety community that too much electromagnetic radiation can cause a breakdown in the blood-brain barrier. So all of these are maybe additional pieces of the puzzle that need to be fit together as well to complete the total picture. However, what to do? From this simple study, the very simplified analysis of the impact of fluid dynamics, it's clear that there should be the application of the discipline called computational fluid dynamics to look at the phenomena in much more scientific detail. Look at the impact of venous flow using computational fluid dynamics. However, one must validate the outputs of some predictive modeling like that with clinical trials. However, in the computer you can do many things that you cannot do in the human body, change the position, the size of blockage, and all those kinds of things. There should probably be additional research related to the other pieces of the puzzle. And there are some implications here, some thoughts for the funding agencies of the research involved. First and foremost, most of the research that's currently being funded are clinical trials. And this is a class of research that's far more costly than others because of the staff and equipment required. And it may well be that not just the currently examined clinical work is the only discipline involved. There may be disciplines in physics, there may be disciplines in vascular science, in dietary science, and so on. And the question then arises the makeup of the funding agencies and their peer review groups and panels. Do they represent the full spectrum of all these bodies of science so that they can adequately address such things as a proposal that wants to conduct computational fluid dynamics and compare the results of such computations to clinical trials? I would like to make some acknowledgments now to my son Andrew, without whom I would have had no interest in the science of MS. To Paolo Zamboni, his wife, his first cadre of patients, and his team of scientist support. Without their insight and without their dedication and trust, the initial experiments would not have occurred. To Dr. Michael Arata, who is an interventional radiologist south of LA, and it was in a conversation with Michael that I had my eureka moment. We were talking about a thickened internal jugular vein, and he said that often we observe that with such a thickened valve at the bottom end of the internal jugular vein, we see that there is a secondary stenosis above it. And he said when we clear that plugged valve, often that secondary stenosis goes away on its own. And my eureka moment was, given my background, that sounded a great deal like a standing wave being cleared out. And that led me back to carry out some computations, simple computations that indicated this seemed to be on the right track. I'd like to thank my wife Isabel. For the last 10 months or so, I've been bringing pieces of this puzzle home and assembling them in various ways with her as a sounding board, and she's patiently listened, and that's been a great help in putting the pieces of this puzzle together to this point. I'd also like to thank a number of others for their early encouragement and advice. Marian Simka, Robert Zavadanoff, Franz Schelling, and there are many others. I don't, I'm sure, have a complete listing here, and for those of you who I've omitted, I apologize, but I do extend my heartfelt thanks. And my thanks to those of you who have sat through all three parts of this presentation. If you find this presentation of use, I'm gratified. Thank you again.